My name is Gabriella Thompson, and I'm 28 years old. After 4 years as an Army combat medic in Iraq, I never imagined my toughest fight would be waiting for me back home. When my grandmother, Eleanor, left that faint, barely audible voicemail, her voice filled me with dread. I pulled every possible string to get emergency leave, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found: an empty house, a woman clinging to life, and a betrayal that would tear our family apart forever. If you're watching this as part of a military family, please comment where you're stationed and subscribe. The next part of my story reveals why those of us who serve sometimes feel like strangers in our own homes. The pervasive sand and scorching heat of Iraq had become my reality after 4 years of deployment. As a combat medic, I'd witnessed humanity's capacity for unimaginable cruelty, but also the most extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. My unit had forged a bond tighter than blood, a family shaped by experiences civilians could never truly comprehend. 3 weeks before my unexpected return, our convoy was ambushed. I can still recall the deafening explosion, the vehicle in front of us flipping, the screams. My training instantly took over. I was moving before conscious thought, my medical bag already in hand as I sprinted toward the overturned Humvee. "Thompson! Wait for cover," someone yelled, but there was no time. Inside that vehicle were 4 of my brothers in arms, men I'd shared meals with just hours earlier. Memories of that day still flashed through my mind: pulling Private Martinez through the shattered windshield, applying a tourniquet to Lieutenant Miller's leg as bullets ricocheted around us, the dead weight of Sergeant Collins as I dragged him behind the wreckage for shelter. All 4 survived, and Captain Reynolds later called it nothing short of miraculous. "Thompson, you have the steadiest hands in the worst situations," Captain Reynolds had told me during the debriefing. "Your quick actions saved lives today." I accepted the compliment with a nod, but inside I felt hollow. Each mission seemed to chip away another piece of me, leaving behind something tougher, yet paradoxically more fragile. My unit understood this contradiction. We never needed to articulate our nightmares to each other. It was Captain Reynolds who noticed my distraction after I received my grandmother's voicemail. I'd listened to it during a rare moment of downtime, sitting alone in the corner of the mess hall. "I'm sorry to bother you, sweetheart," my grandmother had whispered, her voice so faint I had to press the phone hard against my ear. "I know you're doing important work. I just thought, no. I don't feel well, and your parents, they're not answering my calls. I'll be fine. I love you, Gabriella." Something in her voice sent a jolt of ice through my veins. In my entire life, my grandmother, Eleanor, had never complained, never asked for help. She was the strongest woman I knew, raising my mother mostly alone while my grandfather William was deployed during Vietnam, then raising me during the many times my parents were off on various exotic vacations. Captain Reynolds found me staring at my phone, my food untouched. "Thompson, you look like you just got orders for another tour," he said, sitting across from me. "What is it?" I explained about the voicemail, about the persistent feeling that something was terribly wrong. Captain Reynolds listened without interruption, his face growing more serious with each word. "Family emergency leave exists for a reason, Thompson," he said finally. "Start the paperwork. I'll push it through." The process wasn't simple. Emergency leave demanded documentation, justification, and signatures from multiple officers. Without concrete evidence of a critical situation, the bureaucracy crawled. For 3 days, I repeatedly called my parents' cell phones, only reaching voicemail. My calls to my grandmother went unanswered. Captain Reynolds championed my cause, calling in favors and expediting the process. "Your record is exemplary, Thompson," he told me. "And sometimes you have to trust your gut. If you feel your grandmother needs you, that's good enough for me." When the leave was finally approved, my unit gathered to see me off. These people had been my entire world for 4 years, had seen me at my best and worst, had trusted me with their lives as I had trusted them with mine. "Bring us back some decent coffee," Specialist Garcia joked, hugging me tight. "Take care of your grandmother, then get your ass back here in one piece," Sergeant Collins said, his gruff voice barely concealing his emotion. Captain Reynolds shook my hand formally, then pulled me into a quick embrace. Whatever you find, Thompson, remember you have family here, too. The journey home was a blur of military transports, commercial flights, and endless waiting. At each layover, I tried calling again. Each unanswered call amplified my growing anxiety. I hadn't told my parents I was coming home. A childish part of me wanted to surprise them, to see the look on their faces when their soldier daughter walked through the door. But another part, the one that had grown suspicious and watchful in the war zone, wanted to assess the situation without giving them time to prepare. When I finally landed in my hometown, the peaceful suburban landscape seemed utterly alien after Iraq's dusty chaos. The manicured lawns, the meticulously tended flowers, the clean sidewalks, it all felt like a movie set, something constructed rather than real. The taxi driver gave me curious glances in the rearview mirror, taking in my military uniform and the duffel bag at my feet. "Coming home? Or just visiting?" he asked conversationally. "Just visiting," I replied, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Was this truly home anymore? The place where I grew up now felt distant, disconnected from the person I had become. I gave him my grandmother's address instead of my parents'. That decision, made on instinct rather than conscious thought, would change everything. The taxi pulled up to my grandmother's modest two-story colonial, and I immediately knew something was wrong. The yard, which she'd always kept immaculate, with the help of a local landscaper, was choked with weeds, strangling the flower beds she'd loved so dearly. Newspapers, yellowed and disintegrating from recent rain, formed a pile on the porch. The curtains were drawn despite it being mid-afternoon. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk, a heavy dread settling in my chest. This neglect was so utterly unlike my grandmother that alarm bells screamed in my head. My medical training and combat instincts merged as I approached the house, moving with deliberate purpose. The spare key was still hidden in the fake rock by the side garden. Inside, the house was silent except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The air was stale and there was a faint smell I recognized all too well from my medical experience, the scent of illness, of a body beginning to fail. "Grandma," I called, my voice echoing through the quiet house. "Grandma, it's Gabriella. Are you here?" No response. The living room was untouched, dusty but neat. The kitchen, however, told a different story. Dishes piled in the sink, some with moldy food still stuck to them. Prescription bottles lined the counter, many unopened. I picked one up, checking the date. It should have been started 2 weeks ago. Heart medication, critical. Ice flooded my veins as I moved faster through the house, checking rooms with increasing urgency. "Grandma!" I called louder, abandoning any pretense of calm. I found her in her bedroom, lying so still on the bed that for one terrible moment, I thought I was too late. But then I saw the shallow rise and fall of her chest, heard the raspy intake of breath. She was alive, but barely. Training took over as I rushed to her side, mentally cataloging symptoms even as my heart shattered. Severe dehydration, mist, medication, possible malnutrition. Her skin was hot and dry to the touch, her lips cracked, her cheeks sunken. This hadn't happened overnight. This was days, possibly weeks, of neglect. "Grandma, it's me, Gabriella," I said gently, taking her hand while checking her pulse with my other. "Rapid, thready, not good. I'm going to help you. Okay, you're going to be okay." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening slightly in recognition. "Gabriella," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You shouldn't be here. Your service." "Don't worry about that," I said, already pulling out my phone to call 911. "I'm exactly where I need to be." As I reported the emergency to the dispatcher, giving my assessment in clipped, professional terms, my grandmother's frail hand gripped mine with surprising strength. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Didn't want to be a burden." Those words, spoken with such sincerity, ignited something inside me, a protective fury I'd only ever felt on the battlefield when one of my unit was threatened. I squeezed her hand gently. "You could never be a burden, Grandma. Never." The paramedics arrived within minutes. I identified myself as a combat medic and briefed them on her condition, using the medical terminology that had become second nature. Suspected severe dehydration, possible missed cardiac medication for approximately 2 weeks, signs of malnutrition. Patient is 79 years old with history of heart problems. The lead paramedic, a woman named Rachel, gave me an appreciative nod as they transferred my grandmother to the stretcher. Good assessment? Were you a nurse before the army? No, learned everything in the field, I replied, gathering my grandmother's medication bottles to bring with us. 4 years in Iraq teaches you to work fast and accurately. Well, your grandmother's lucky you came home when you did, Rachel said quietly as her partner prepared the IV line. Another day like this. She didn't need to finish the sentence. In the ambulance, I held my grandmother's hand as the paramedics worked around me, establishing an IV for fluids and checking her vitals. Her skin was paper-thin, blue veins visible beneath the surface. I found myself wondering how things had gotten to this point. Where were my parents? They lived less than 30 minutes away. Why hadn't they been checking on her? At the hospital, the emergency team took over, and I found myself relegated to the waiting room, despite my medical background. Civilian rules were different, and here I was just family, not a healthcare provider. The helplessness was suffocating after years of being the one people relied on in crisis. While waiting for news, I searched through my grandmother's phone, which I grabbed along with her purse before leaving the house. I needed answers, and I needed them now. What I found made my blood run cold. A text thread with my mother from 3 weeks ago. Grandma, not feeling well today. Could you please come over? Having trouble getting to my medication. Mom. Sorry, Mom. Really busy with work. Can you call a neighbor? Grandma. Everyone is at work. Just need help for a little while. Mom. Take a taxi to the doctor if you're really feeling bad. We're swamped with preparations for our trip. Grandma. What trip? Mom. Rob and I are going to Cabo for a few weeks, much needed break. We'll check in when we get back. Grandma. When are you leaving? Mom. Tomorrow morning. Early flight, Grandma. Please, Diana, I don't feel right. There were no more messages after that. My mother hadn't responded to my grandmother's plea for help. Instead, according to the timestamp, she had left for vacation the very next day. The doctor emerged from the treatment area just as I was fighting back tears of rage. Family of Eleanor Thompson? I stood quickly. I'm her granddaughter, Gabriella Thompson. Your grandmother is stabilized but in serious condition, the doctor explained. Severe dehydration, missed medication, and the beginning stages of pneumonia. Has she been living alone? Yes, but my parents live nearby. They were supposed to be checking on her. My voice was tight with controlled fury. The doctor's expression said everything. We both knew this was neglect, pure and simple. Well, it's a good thing you arrived when you did. Another 24 hours, and we would be having a very different conversation. The words hit me like physical blows. I had almost lost her. Can I see her? She's being moved to the ICU. She's asking for you. In the sterile hospital room, my grandmother looked impossibly small beneath the white sheets, tubes, and wires connecting her to various machines. But her eyes were clearer now, more focused as I approached. My beautiful girl, she said. Her voice slightly stronger thanks to the fluids and medication. You came all the way from Iraq. Of course I did, I said, taking her hand carefully to avoid disturbing the four. Why didn't you tell me things were this bad? She looked away. Your parents said you were too busy saving lives over there to worry about an old woman's complaints. A tear slipped down her cheek. They said they would take care of everything. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the picture it formed was ugly. And when did you last see them, Grandma? Almost a month ago. They brought groceries. Said they were going on a business trip. The home nurse stopped coming 2 weeks ago. Said she wasn't being paid anymore. She closed her eyes briefly. I tried to manage, but the stares became too much. I got so tired. I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat. Rest now, Grandma. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. As she drifted off to sleep, I pulled out my phone again, this time opening Facebook. I rarely use social media while deployed, but now I had a purpose. It took less than a minute to find my mother's profile, and what I saw confirmed my worst suspicions and ignited a fury I had rarely felt, even in combat. My parents were indeed in Cabo San Lucas, their faces tanned and smiling in dozens of photos, poolside cocktails, sunset cruises, spa treatments, all posted publicly with captions about living their best life and deserving this break. The timestamps showed they had left the day after my grandmother had texted for help and had been there ever since. While my grandmother lay dying alone in her bedroom, they were parasailing and attending beach parties. My hands shook with rage as I scrolled through the endless vacation photos. My mother Diana and father Robert seemed to be competing for who could look more carefree. Day 7 in paradise, read one caption under a photo of them clinking champagne glasses on a catamaran. Absolutely deserved after such a stressful year, managing family obligations. Family obligations. My grandmother, their mother, apparently qualified as a stressful obligation rather than a beloved parent who had sacrificed everything for them. Another post made my jaw clench. Sometimes you just have to put yourself first. No regrets. About this spontaneous getaway. This one was timestamped exactly 1 week after they had left my grandmother alone. I called my mother's cell phone, not caring about the international roaming charges. After 4 rings, she answered, the sound of music and laughter in the background. Gabriella, is that you, honey? What a surprise. Her voice was artificially bright, slightly slurred from what I assumed were afternoon cocktails. Where are you? I asked, my voice steadily calm. Oh, your father and I are just taking a little vacation in Mexico. Much needed stress relief. You know how it is? She laughed, the sound grating against my ears. We've been working so hard taking care of your grandmother and managing everything while you're away playing soldier. The dismissive way she referred to my military service was nothing new, but it struck a deeper nerve now. Funny you should mention Grandma, I said. I'm sitting beside her hospital bed right now. There was a moment of silence then. Hospital? What happened? Is she okay? No, she's not okay. She nearly died, Mom. I found her severely dehydrated, having missed her heart medication for 2 weeks, alone in her house with no food or help. Another pause. Well, that's just impossible. We arranged for a home nurse to check on her while we were gone. She must have fired the nurse or something. You know how stubborn she can be. The casual deflection of responsibility made my blood boil. The nurse quit because she wasn't being paid anymore. Did you know that? Listen, Gabriella, I think you're overreacting. Your grandmother has always been dramatic about her health. She's probably just upset we went on vacation without her permission. You know, she tries to control everything. I could scarcely believe what I was hearing. She has pneumonia, Mom. The doctor said another day and she would have died alone. While you were posting selfies from a beach resort. Now you're just trying to make me feel guilty. My mother snapped, her tone hardening. We've given up everything to take care of her since your grandfather died. We deserve a break. You have no idea what it's like because you conveniently ran off to the army instead of helping with family responsibilities. Put Dad on the phone, I demanded, unwilling to engage with her twisted logic. He's in the pool. Look, we'll cut our trip short and be home in a few days, okay? Stop being so dramatic. A few days? She's in intensive care right now. What do you expect us to do, Gabriella? Waste thousands of dollars on changed flights when the doctors are already taking care of her. You're there now, so problem solved. We'll see you both when we get back. The call ended, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. This level of callousness went beyond mere selfishness. Something else was going on and I intended to find out what? I found the home nurse's contact information in my grandmother's phone. Heather Jackson. RN. I called her immediately. Miss Jackson, this is Gabriella Thompson, Eleanor Thompson's granddaughter. I'm a combat medic home on emergency leave, and I found my grandmother in terrible condition. I understand you were her home nurse until recently. There was a pause. On the other end, yes, I was. And I feel terrible about what happened. Is she okay? She's stable but in the ICU. Can you tell me why you stopped coming to care for her? Heather sighed heavily. Your parents stopped paying me 6 weeks ago. I continued visiting for 2 more weeks unpaid because I was worried about her, but I have my own bills and family to support. I called your parents repeatedly, but they kept saying the payment was processing, or that they were sorting out insurance issues. Did they tell you they were going to Mexico? No, Heather said, sounding surprised. They told me they were dealing with business problems and would be very busy but reachable by phone. I left detailed instructions with them about your grandmother's care schedule, her medications, everything. And who was supposed to be checking on her after you left? Your mother assured me they would be stopping by daily and had arranged for another service to take over. I asked for the name of the agency so I could transfer my notes, but she said she would handle it. Heather paused. There was no other service, was there? No, I confirmed grimly. There was not. After thanking the nurse and getting her agreement to provide a statement if needed, I returned to my grandmother's house once the doctors assured me she would sleep through the night with medication. The house felt even more oppressive in the darkness. I turned on lights as I moved through the rooms, determined to understand the full scope of what had happened. In the kitchen, I found a stack of mail piled on a side table. Bill after bill, many stamped past due, or final notice, electric, water, property tax, medical bills, all unopened. This made no sense. My grandfather had left my grandmother well provided for. He had been a successful engineer with an excellent pension and substantial savings. There should have been more than enough money to cover these expenses. In the study, I found more financial documents, bank statements showing regular, large withdrawals over the past year, all made by my mother, who was apparently a co-signer on the accounts. Credit card statements in my grandmother's name featured charges for restaurants, boutiques, and travel agencies that my grandmother would never have visited. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was even uglier than I had initially thought. My parents had not just neglected my grandmother. They had been systematically draining her resources while providing minimal care. As I stood in my grandfather's study, surrounded by evidence of my parents' betrayal, my eyes fell on the painting behind his desk, a landscape of the mountains in Colorado, where he and my grandmother had honeymooned. Something stirred in my memory, a conversation from years ago when I was home on leave after basic training. Gabriella, my grandfather had said, leading me into this very study. I want to show you something, just between us. He had moved the painting aside, revealing a wall safe. The combination is your birthday. If anything ever happens to me and your grandmother needs help, you remember this safe. Everything important is in here. My grandfather had died 2 years ago from a sudden heart attack. In the grief and chaos that followed, with my parents taking charge of the funeral arrangements and my grandmother's care, I had forgotten about the safe until now. I moved the painting aside, revealing the small metal safe embedded in the wall. My birthday, 032019997. The lock clicked and the door swung open. Inside were several folders of legal documents, a small box, and a USB drive labeled in my grandfather's neat handwriting. For Gabriella, watch first. I stared at the USB drive, my grandfather's handwriting bringing a lump to my throat. Even 2 years after his death, I missed him terribly. William Thompson had been a man of integrity, a Vietnam veteran who understood what it meant to serve, who had supported my decision to join the army when my parents had responded with disdain. I remembered how he would sit with me on the back porch when I was home on leave, listening to my stories from deployment without judgment or the uncomfortable pity I often saw in civilian eyes. "You're doing important work, Abby," he would say. "But remember, the strength that helps you survive over there can become a wall that keeps people out over here. Don't let the war take your compassion." With shaking hands, I took the USB drive and the folders to my grandfather's desk. His laptop was still there, dusty but functional. I plugged in the drive and found a single video file. My grandfather's face filled the screen, and I had to stifle a sob. He looked exactly as I remembered him, steel gray hair neatly combed, blue eyes sharp and kind behind wire-rimmed glasses, the slight smile that always seemed to play at the corners of his mouth. "Hello, Gabriella," he began. "If you are watching this, then something has happened that has caused you concern about your grandmother's welfare. I pray that day never comes, but I have learned in life to prepare for all eventualities. He shifted slightly, looking uncomfortable with what he needed to say next. Your mother has always been complicated. Eleanor and I perhaps indulged her too much, compensated too much for her self-centeredness by giving her everything she wanted. We hoped she would grow out of it, but instead she found Robert, who unfortunately shares and encouraged her worst tendencies. My grandfather sighed, looking suddenly older. When I had my first heart scare last year, I saw something in their eyes when the doctors discussed my prognosis. Not concern, but calculation. I pray I am wrong about them, Gabriella. I truly do. But if I am not, and if they have in any way neglected your grandmother or misused the resources meant for her care, then you need to know several things. He proceeded to explain in detail the provisions he had made. The house and the majority of his assets had been left to my grandmother, with my parents named as executors of the will, but with strict fiduciary responsibilities. There was a sizable trust specifically for my grandmother's medical care and living expenses. After my grandmother, I was the primary beneficiary. Not my mother. A decision, he said, was based on my demonstrated responsibility and care for others. Most importantly, my grandfather continued, I added a contingency clause. If your parents fail in their responsibilities to your grandmother, if they misuse funds or neglect her care, then Michael Bennett, my attorney, has instructions to remove them as executors and transfer control to you, along with documentation that will allow you to assume power of attorney for your grandmother's affairs. My grandfather leaned closer to the camera, his expression intensely serious. Gabriella, you have always shown the same sense of duty and honor that I tried to live by. If you are watching this, then you have already demonstrated that by checking on your grandmother when something didn't feel right. Trust that instinct. It has served you well in the army, and it will serve you well in this situation too. His expression softened. I am so proud of the woman you have become, of your service to our country, and of the care you have always shown to your grandmother. If the worst has happened, and your parents have betrayed that trust, do not blame yourself for not being here. You are serving a greater good, just as I did many years ago. He smiled, that familiar warm smile that had always made me feel safe. The documents in the safe will give you everything you need to protect Eleanor. Michael's contact information is there too. He is expecting your call whenever it might come. My grandfather paused, seeming to search for final words. Remember, Gabby, family is defined by love and care, not just by blood. Whatever difficult decisions lie ahead, know that you have my complete faith and support. I love you, granddaughter. Take care of our Eleanor. The video ended, and I sat in the dim study, tears streaming down my face. Grief and rage warred within me, grief for the grandfather who had known what might happen and had tried to prepare for it from beyond the grave, and rage at the parents who had confirmed his worst fears. After composing myself, I opened the folders from the safe. Everything was there, exactly as my grandfather had described: the will, the trust documents, the power of attorney forms, the contingency clause. At the very bottom was a business card from Michael Bennett, attorney at law, with a handwritten note on the back. Call any time, day or night, no matter how many years pass. I checked my watch. Nearly 11 p.m., too late to call now, but first. Think tomorrow, I would be in Michael Bennett's office with this evidence in hand. The small box from the safe contained one more surprise: my grandmother's original wedding ring. A beautiful vintage piece, with a note, for Gabriella when the time is right. Your grandmother approved this decision before my passing. That night, I slept in my old bedroom at my grandmother's house, surrounded by the artifacts of my childhood, trophies from swim meets, photographs of me in my first army uniform, books my grandfather had given me over the years. The contrast between the love that had filled this home and the callous betrayal of my parents could not have been more stark. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and difficult decisions. But for tonight, I allowed myself to grieve for the family that might have been, and to prepare for the battle ahead. At precisely 9 a.m., I walked into the law offices of Bennett and Associates, the folders from my grandfather's safe securely in my bag. The receptionist looked up, taking in my military bearing and determined expression. "I need to see Michael Bennett," I said. "I'm Gabriella Thompson, William Thompson's granddaughter." Her eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Of course, Miss Thompson. Mr. Bennett has had a standing instruction regarding your family for some time. Please come with me." Michael Bennett was older than I expected, perhaps in his 70s, with a shock of white hair and keen eyes that missed nothing. He stood when I entered, extending his hand. "Miss Thompson, your grandfather spoke of you often and with great pride. I have been expecting you, though I confess I hoped the circumstances would never arise." "So did I, Mr. Bennett," I replied, taking the offered seat. "But I'm afraid my grandfather's concerns were well-founded." Over the next hour I laid out everything I had discovered: my grandmother's condition, my parents' absence, the unpaid bills, the drained accounts, the fired nurse. I showed him the social media posts, the text messages, and finally the documents from the safe. Bennett listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he nodded gravely. "Your grandfather was one of my oldest friends, as well as my client. He feared something like this might happen, which is why he put such specific provisions in his will." He tapped the contingency clause document. "This is quite clear. Your parents have violated their fiduciary duty as executors and have failed in their obligation to care for Eleanor. We have more than sufficient grounds to enact the contingency clause immediately." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means we file an emergency petition with the court today. Given the circumstances, your grandmother's critical condition, due to neglect while your parents are out of the country, I believe the judge will grant immediate temporary guardianship to you. We will also freeze the accounts your parents have been accessing and begin the process of removing them as executors. How quickly can we move?" Bennett's expression was grimly determined. "I will call Judge Harrison directly. She has handled your family's legal matters for years. Given the medical emergency nature of this situation, we should be able to get an emergency hearing this afternoon." True to his word, Bennett worked with remarkable efficiency. By 1 p.m., we were seated in Judge Harrison's chambers, presenting our case. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the medical reports, financial records, and legal documents with careful attention. "This is a clear case of elder neglect and financial exploitation," she concluded. "I am granting temporary emergency guardianship to Gabriella Thompson, effective immediately. The accounts will be frozen pending a full accounting and a restraining order issued preventing Robert and Diana Thompson from accessing Eleanor Thompson's property or finances." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "Miss Thompson, are you prepared to assume responsibility for your grandmother's care?" "Yes, Your Honor. I have already requested an extension to my emergency leave, and I am exploring options for a permanent transfer to a stateside assignment." "Very good. We will schedule a formal hearing in 30 days, at which time your parents will have an opportunity to respond to these allegations. Given the evidence presented, however, I do not anticipate my ruling will change." As we left the courthouse, Bennett placed a fatherly hand on my shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud of you, Gabriella. Now, I suggest you prepare yourself. Your parents will not take this lying down." He was right. Within hours of the accounts being frozen and the legal notifications sent electronically to my parents, my phone exploded with calls and texts. I let them go to voicemail, focusing instead on returning to the hospital where my grandmother's condition had stabilized overnight. It was during my visit, as I sat holding my grandmother's frail hand and telling her about the legal proceedings, that my parents finally made their dramatic entrance. They burst into the hospital room without warning, still tanned from their vacation, my mother wearing designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, my father in an expensive polo shirt. The incongruity of their resort wear in the sterile ICU would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" my mother demanded, her voice loud enough to make the monitors beep as my grandmother's heart rate increased in response to the stress. "We just got served legal papers at the airport." I stood, positioning myself between them and my grandmother's bed. Keep your voice down. This is an ICU, not a beach bar. Don't you dare take that tone with us. My father interjected, his face flushed with anger. We cut our vacation short to deal with this coup you're staging. Freezing our accounts, guardianship. Have you lost your mind in that war zone? I found Grandma dying alone in her house while you two were posting selfies from Cabo. I replied, keeping my voice deliberately calm and quiet. The home nurse quit because you stopped paying her. The bills haven't been paid in months. Meanwhile, you've been draining Grandma's accounts for your own expenses. What exactly did you think would happen when this was discovered? We've been managing your grandmother's affairs just fine. My mother snapped. So, we took a vacation. We deserved it after everything we've done. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to care for an elderly parent? Actually, I do, I countered. I've been doing it for the past 48 hours while simultaneously dealing with the mess you left behind. And apparently, your idea of managing affairs includes embezzlement and elder neglect. My father stepped forward, finger pointed at my face. Now you listen here. No, you listen, I interrupted. My combat-trained instincts making me stand taller, my voice taking on the commanding tone I used in crisis situations. Grandma is going to recover, no thanks to you. The court has granted me temporary guardianship. The financial investigation is already underway. And if you don't leave this room right now, I will have security remove you, as you are causing distress to a critical patient. You can't keep us from our own mother. My mother protested, looking around as if seeking support from the hospital staff, who were now watching the confrontation with concerned expressions. Actually, the restraining order says I can, I replied. You can contest all of this at the hearing in 30 days. Until then, stay away from Grandma and her property. This isn't over. My father growled as a security guard approached, summoned by one of the nurses. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Neither did you, I responded quietly. Now, please leave before you are escorted out. They left, my mother's theatrical sobs echoing down the hallway. As the door closed behind them, I turned back to my grandmother, who was watching me with a mixture of distress and something that looked like pride. I'm sorry you had to see that, Grandma, I said, taking her hand again. You sounded just like your grandfather, she whispered. You would be so proud of you, standing up to them like that. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The financial investigation revealed the full extent of my parents' misdeeds, over $200,000, diverted from my grandmother's accounts over the past year. Bills left unpaid despite ample funds being available. And perhaps most disturbing, attempts to refinance my grandmother's fully paid house, with my mother forging signatures on the paperwork. The emergency hearing became a formal removal proceeding, with the judge invoking the contingency clause in my grandfather's will and permanently removing my parents as executors. Control of all assets was transferred to me, with court oversight to ensure proper management. Most satisfying was the judge's ruling on the disinheritance provision, another clause my grandfather had included, stating that any executive who breached their fiduciary duty would forfeit their inheritance. My parents had effectively disinherited themselves through their actions. As they left the courtroom, their expressions of shocked entitlement confirmed everything my grandfather had feared about their character. They had gambled with my grandmother's life for their own comfort and lost everything in the process. The weeks following the court ruling were challenging in ways I had not anticipated. My parents, faced with the consequences of their actions, launched a desperate campaign to salvage both their financial situation and their social standing. My phone became unusable as they bombarded me with calls and messages, 82 missed calls in one 24-hour period alone. The messages evolved from rage, you ungrateful brat, to manipulation, your grandfather never understood our sacrifices, to pitiful pleading, we'll be ruined without that money. I blocked their numbers, but they enlisted family, friends, and distant relatives to act as intermediaries. Each one called with some variation of, there must be a way to work this out within the family. What these well-meaning but misguided individuals failed to understand was that my parents had already destroyed the family through their actions. This was no longer about money, but about justice and my grandmother's safety. Meanwhile, as my grandmother's health improved enough for her to be moved from the ICU to a regular room, I focused on rebuilding the support system that should have been in place all along. I rehired Heather, the home nurse, arranging for her to receive back pay for the weeks she had worked without compensation. I contacted the landscaping service, the housekeeping service, and all the other providers who had helped maintain my grandmother's quality of life before my parents had cut corners to fund their extravagant lifestyle. One unexpected source of support came from James Wilson, my childhood friend, who now worked as a physical therapist at the hospital. We had grown up on the same street, our houses just 3 doors apart, and had remained casual friends through high school before life took us in different directions, me to the army, him to college and professional training. James spotted me in the hospital cafeteria one evening and joined me uninvited, his familiar grin a welcome sight after days of legal battles and family drama. "Gabriella Thompson," he said, setting his tray across from mine. "The prodigal combat medic returns. Though from what I hear, you've been fighting different kinds of battles since you got back." I smiled despite my exhaustion. "Word travels fast. Small town," he shrugged. "Plus, I was on rotation in the ICU when your parents made their scene." "Pretty hard to miss," I winced. Not my family's finest moment.
"Hey," he said, his expression turning serious.
"What you're doing for your grandmother, it's incredible. And for what it's worth, not everyone is taking your parents' side. Some of us remember how your grandfather was, what he stood for. The apple didn't fall far from the tree with you." That simple validation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. James pretended not to notice, giving me a moment to compose myself by launching into a story about our old high school principal who had recently been caught skinny dipping in the town lake after the annual fundraiser. By the time he finished the ridiculous tale, I was laughing for the first time since returning home. It felt foreign, almost wrong given the circumstances, but also necessary. "Listen," James said, as we finished our mediocre hospital coffee. "I specialize in geriatric physical therapy now. If your grandmother needs help with recovery once she's discharged, I'd be happy to work with her. Professional rates, of course. I know you're doing everything by the book." His offer was the first of many from the community. As news spread about what had happened, people stepped forward, neighbors offering to check in daily once my grandmother returned home. My grandfather's old friends from the VFW providing transportation to medical appointments. Even the local grocery store arranging special delivery service. It was a powerful reminder that family could be defined by care and commitment rather than just by blood, exactly as my grandfather had said in his video message. My parents, meanwhile, escalated their desperate attempts to regain control. They spread rumors that my military service had left me mentally unstable, that I was paranoid from PTSD and imagining their misdeeds. When that failed to gain traction with people who actually knew me, they tried breaking into my grandmother's house while I was at the hospital, apparently searching for additional documents or valuables. The security system I had installed caught them in the act, resulting in a police report and strengthening of the restraining order. Their increasingly erratic behavior only confirmed the wisdom of my grandfather's contingency planning. The final confrontation came when my mother ambushed me in the hospital parking lot, blocking my car with hers. She stepped out, designer purse clutched like a shield, her expression a carefully constructed mask of maternal concern. "Gabriella, sweetheart, this has gone far enough," she began, her voice honey-sweet in a way that had always preceded manipulation. "Your father and I are worried about you. The stress of war, coming home to a sick grandmother. It's no wonder you're not thinking clearly." I stood by my car door, keys in hand, maintaining a careful distance. "I'm thinking perfectly clearly. Mom, the financial records show exactly what you and Dad did. The court has ruled. This conversation is pointless." "Families shouldn't be treating each other this way," she pressed, taking a step toward me. "Your grandfather would be heartbroken to see this division. The invocation of my grandfather ignited a cold fury within me. Don't speak of him. He saw through you both long before I did. That's why he prepared for exactly this situation. Her facade cracked slightly, anger flashing in her eyes. He always did favor you, turning you against us with his military nonsense and talk of duty and honor. And now look at you, so righteous, so judgmental. This isn't about judgment, Mom. It's about consequences. You left your own mother to die alone while you partied in Cabo. You stole her money. You fired her nurse. These are not accusations. They are documented facts. We made one mistake, she insisted, her voice rising. One vacation at the wrong time. Does that erase decades of being good parents to you? Does that justify destroying our lives, taking our inheritance? I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time saw clearly the person she truly was, not a mother who had failed or made mistakes, but someone fundamentally incapable of accepting responsibility, of putting others before herself. This was never about the inheritance, I said quietly. This was about Grandma's safety and well-being. The fact that you still don't understand that tells me everything I need to know. I got into my car, and as I drove away, I watched in the rearview mirror as she stood alone in the parking lot, her designer clothes and perfect hair incongruous against the stark hospital backdrop. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, not for her loss of money or status, but for her inability to understand what she had truly lost, the chance to be part of a real family built on love and care, rather than obligation or convenience. That night, sitting beside my grandmother's hospital bed as she slept peacefully, I made the decision that would shape the next chapter of my life. I called Captain Reynolds in Iraq. 6 months passed, bringing changes I could never have anticipated. When I first returned home on emergency leave, my grandmother, once at death's door, now sat across from me on her patio, a colorful Afghan across her knees despite the warm spring day, her eyes bright as she watched the birds at her newly installed feeder. The cardinal is back, she observed, pointing to a flash of red among the branches. Your grandfather always said cardinals were visitors from those who have left us. I smiled, pouring her another cup of tea. Then he's checking up on us, making sure we're doing okay. And are we doing okay? She asked, her gaze shifting to me with the perceptiveness that age and experience had sharpened rather than dulled. Yes, I answered truthfully. I think we are. The decision to request a stateside assignment had been easier than I expected. Captain Reynolds had listened to my situation and immediately begun the paperwork for my transfer to the military hospital in a neighboring city, just 30 minutes from my grandmother's house. The Army needs good medics everywhere, Thompson, he had said, and some battles need to be fought on the home front. My new position allowed me to continue serving, while being present for my grandmother's recovery. More than that, it had connected me with a veteran support group in the area, giving me a purpose I hadn't realized I needed, helping other returning service members navigate the sometimes bewildering transition to civilian life. My relationship with James had evolved from rekindled friendship to something deeper. He had been a constant, steadying presence through all the changes, never pushing but always there when needed. His expertise in geriatric physical therapy had been invaluable to my grandmother's recovery, and his perspective as someone who had known me before my military service helped bridge the gap I sometimes felt between my soldier self and my civilian self.
You know, my grandmother said, interrupting my thoughts, William would approve of James. He always said that boy had a good heart.
I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. Grandma, we're just nothing. She interrupted with a knowing smile. I may be old, Gabriella, but I'm not blind. The way that young man looks at you, it's how your grandfather used to look at me. The comparison made my heart ache in a bittersweet way. James and I were taking things slowly, both aware of the unusual circumstances that had brought us together, and the importance of building something genuine that could stand on its own merits. But there was no denying the connection between us, the easy understanding and shared values that made conversation flow and silence comfortable. What about your parents? My grandmother asked suddenly, her expression sobering. Have you heard from them? The question was inevitable, though we rarely discussed them these days. After the final confrontation in the hospital parking lot, my parents had made one last desperate attempt to contest the court's ruling, hiring an expensive attorney who specialized in overturning wills. The effort had failed spectacularly, with the judge not only upholding the original decision but also ordering them to pay all legal costs. Last I had heard, they had moved to Florida, starting over with whatever resources they had managed to salvage. They had not attempted contact in months, not even when my grandmother's 80th birthday was celebrated with a small gathering of true friends and family. No, I answered honestly, and I don't expect to. My grandmother nodded slowly. I spent so many years making excuses for Diana, seeing only what I wanted to see. Mothers do that, you know? We want so badly for our children to be the people we raise them to be, not the people they choose to become. I reached across the table, taking her thin hand in mine. You did everything right, Grandma. Some people just choose a different path. I know that now, she said. And I'm so grateful that you chose a better one. She squeezed my hand. Not everyone would have given up what you did, your unit, your life overseas to come back and care for an old woman. I didn't give up anything that matters, I told her firmly. I gained everything that does. And it was true. The past 6 months had been challenging, but clarifying. I had learned lessons about family, duty, and resilience that no military training could have taught me. I had learned that family was not defined by obligation, but by choice. The daily choice to care, to show up, to put others' needs alongside your own. My unit in Iraq had been family. James was becoming family. The network of support we had built around my grandmother was family. Blood was only the beginning of the story, not the whole of it. I had learned that the strength that had served me in combat, the ability to stay calm in crisis, to assess situations quickly, to act decisively, had applications far beyond the battlefield. That same strength had allowed me to stand up against injustice in my own family, to navigate complex legal and medical systems, and to rebuild what had been broken. Most importantly, I had learned that healing rarely followed a straight line. My grandmother's physical recovery had come in fits and starts, with setbacks and victories. My own emotional healing, processing the betrayal, the anger, the loss of the family, I thought I had followed a similar pattern. Some days were harder than others, but the trajectory was upward. You know what your grandfather would say about all this? My grandmother asked, her eyes drifting back to the cardinal that had returned to the feeder. What's that? He would say that the true measure of a person is not what they do when everything is easy, but what they choose when everything is hard. She smiled at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You measured up, Gabriella. More than measured up. As the afternoon sun bathed the garden in golden light, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years, both in the war zone and since returning home. My grandfather had been right. The strength that helped me survive over there could become a wall that kept people out over here. But it could also become a foundation upon which to build something new and better. The road ahead would have its challenges. My grandmother's health would have good days and bad. My own adjustment to stateside service and eventual transition to civilian life would require patience and grace. The relationship with James would need time and care to flourish. But sitting there in the garden my grandfather had planted and my grandmother had tended, I knew with certainty that we would face whatever came next together, bound not by obligation but by choice, not by blood alone but by love demonstrated through action. That, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all. That family, true family, was built day by day, choice by choice, act of care by act of care. And in the end, those choices and those acts mattered more than any inheritance, any legal document, any shared genetics. They were, in fact, the only legacy worth having. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between career and family? Drop a comment below about how you navigated that decision. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences that remind us what truly matters. Share this with someone who might be struggling with family obligations or difficult relatives right now. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these challenges makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, family isn't just who we're related to, but who shows up when it matters most.